we have a verse that we're going to have as our theme verse for the year, 2 Timothy 2:3. You therefore must endure hardship as a good soldier of Messiah Yeshua. You know, I couldn't find one with kittens and bunnies in it, so I chose this one instead. No, this is not the message that most people want to be hearing, is it? To endure hardship. That's not what we want to hear. However, we're living in the last days, and things really are changing. And you know, we're not called just to be saved. That's just the beginning, isn't it? We are called to be soldiers of Messiah Yeshua, spiritual fighters for the kingdom. And to do that as a soldier, to be a good soldier, well, you must endure hardship. And this is what the scriptures tell us. And all the more so in the times that we're living. So our theme is supernatural warfare, fight to win. You know, we're not just going to let Satan and the world just pummel us and drive us into a corner. We're actively part of Messiah's army, and we are doing things. We are acting on behalf of the kingdom, and we intend to be effective. So that's our stance. Now, sometimes out there, it gets kind of rough. And maybe this picture makes sense to some of you. You know, maybe you have been through some spiritual chaos like this, and it kind of feels like, oh, where is the nearest foxhole? And you might wonder, well, why is this happening, that we're experiencing such things? And it's because we are soldiers in a universal battlefield. That's really the reason. So some people are not real aware of the spiritual battle. And because they're not aware, when the spiritual battle comes and visits them at their door, they wonder, how did this happen? How did I end up in the middle of this spiritual battlefield? You know, I just kind of wanted to experience grace and, you know, love and the good stuff. I didn't want this whole battlefield experience, you know? Well, here's where we need to have a little review so that we will remember where the battle came from. And just a few simple things here. You might recognize that guy. The universal war started here, in the garden, right? We had the beautiful place. We had the paradise where everything was perfect. And unfortunately, we could not keep it. That's kind of the bottom line. So what happened is the spirit creature we call the devil came into the garden in the guise of a snake and tempted our first parents. And you kind of wonder, like, okay, you've got a paradise, you've got everything, how could you be tempted? But they were, because they were so innocent. You know, they were a lot like a lot of believers today. They were so innocent and so thinking that nobody was going to do anything bad to them, that the enemy was just able to lead them right down the garden path to destruction. And look at what it has brought on all the generations of mankind since then. And this was the beginning of the war. And realize it was not our Creator that started the war. It was the rebels that started the war against him. They thought they could do better than him. And they thought that they could take over the rulership. from the Creator, who rightfully has the right to rule what he created. So what happened there in the garden is he spoke a prophecy to those involved, including to the serpent. He said, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He will bruise your head and you will bruise his heel. So this was a prophecy of what would happen. Enmity is hatred, isn't it? So from this point on, the war was on. So what was the objective of the war? The rebel objective was universal dominion. To steal dominion away from the Creator and from his seed, if you will, and to grasp onto it for themselves. Because it wasn't just the serpent. The serpent developed a seed. And we have to realize about this war that there is a great personal cost to those who are deceived by the enemy. This is from the book of Revelation. Anyone whose name was not found recorded in the book of life was thrown into the lake of fire. Eternity is at stake in the war. Your eternity is at stake. My eternity is at stake. So this is why we cannot afford to be overconfident or to ignore the war. Because ever since then, the war has been ongoing. So what happened back there? Well, the serpent got busy reproducing other rebels like himself in both heaven and earth. And this was at the beginning of the war. And right away, he started having amazing success. It must have been startling, really, both in heaven and on earth as the population of mankind grew, to see the incredible success that the enemy was having. People were choosing him over their Creator. And that's what was happening. And not only that, before long it got this bad. Genesis tells us the earth was corrupt before Elohim, and the earth was filled with violence. Elohim saw the earth and saw that it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. Things got so bad that other than Noah and his family, the whole world was corrupt. And at this point, the Creator had to step in to save the creation that he had made. And as we know, he washed the world clean. So then you had this fresh new start, right? You had a family who followed Yahweh. You had this experience of what happens when people follow the enemy. So what you would think would happen is that things would be different after the flood. And as people came about on the earth, they would fear the true God. Actually, in a few hundred years, it got just as bad again as it was before the flood. There weren't so many people in the world yet. There was, however, a large population who were all gathered in the same area. And they resented the flood, in fact. And they resented that the Creator would intervene in the way that he did. And there were instigators that were raised up by the enemy who maligned the Creator. And they chose to follow the enemy and to follow the other fallen ones that were with him. And they decided to turn their back on their Creator, literally to ignore him, and maybe he would go away. And they built a tower, and the purpose of the tower was to commune with evil spirits. That's what they were doing. And so if you think of this, this is the fathers and mothers of the entire human race that turned their back on the Creator. And Romans 1:28 is talking about this when it says, just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to a depraved mind to do those things which are not proper. So from this time forward, because of this choice of mankind, the devil and those with him have had rulership over the earth. They are, in fact, ruling over the earth. However, the Creator has not given up his right to rule. So at times when he's needed to do it, he intervenes. And there's really a war between these spiritual powers. And I think it's good to note that when we look at the flood, we realize that our Father in heaven, who is all-powerful, could just wipe out the enemy. But as we see from that first prophecy in the garden, that was not his way. He was going to allow this war to actually move forward through time to come to its conclusion, to give every person an opportunity to choose which side they want to be on. And many times people don't know that they're choosing, but they are, by the things they're doing in their life and the things they're not doing. They're choosing which side of the war they want to be on. And of course, the enemy of mankind continues to do what he did in the garden. He wants to close the eyes of people to what the truth is, to the Creator, and instead lull them into a false sense of security and to cause them to become totally absorbed with their own selves, their own feelings, their own desires. And this is what most people fall into. And that's really sad that that's true. However, there have been some that have had their eyes open and choose the other side in the war, the side of the Creator. But it is a war if you choose that. And you need to know that going in. You need to understand as a believer that you're at war and that you're fighting for something. And that's very important to understand. After this happened and the whole world rejected our Creator, he made a counter move. This is all like a big chess game. And he made a counter move of creating one nation for himself out of all the nations of the world. All the other nations, they belonged to these other evil spirit gods. But he raised up one nation to represent the true God in the world. And we know he did this through the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, which name means he will rule as God. Exodus 19:5 and 6 tell us what Yahweh said to his nation at Mount Sinai, where he first assembled them as a nation. He says, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my own possession from among all peoples. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel. They agreed that this is what they would do. And they entered into this covenant. And it's easy to say you're going to do something. Over time, it's harder to do it. And so the nation of Israel has had a very mixed history, and we all know that. We can read about it in the pages of the scriptures. But we see here what the deal was, because this is the deal. If we obey his voice and we keep his covenant, then we can be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. This is conditional. It's conditioned on keeping the covenant and obedience. So what it turns out is that not all who claim to be Israel are Israel according to these terms. The ones that are the true Israel, which the scriptures refer to as the remnant of Israel, are the remnant who are faithful to the covenant, who obey his voice. And unfortunately, in most every generation, but not all, that's been a minority of Israel. And so after this time, it became apparent who the woman was that he was talking about in Genesis 3:15. The woman is the woman Israel. In Revelation chapter 12, it gives us this picture of a woman about to give birth with a crown of 12 stars, indicating the 12 tribes of Israel. She was in pain, laboring to give birth, and as we read on, she does in fact give birth. This is the woman and her seed that it's talking about. The woman gave us a champion, a mighty champion, the Son of the living God. The Lion, who is of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has overcome. We've been spending a lot of time with him. We've been spending a lot of time walking with him through the Gospels in his life. We have seen his amazing courage facing up to the evil ones. We have seen his laser-like focus on the truth and his ability to stand by the truth no matter what was happening in his life. We saw him actually defeat the enemy by being willing to be defeated. Now, isn't that an interesting concept? That's what the enemy thought. Finally, I'm defeating God. And can you imagine the glee among all of the enemies of God when the Son of God was nailed to that tree? You can hear it in the background as you read the story in the Gospels. Little did they know that this was a war strategy to defeat the enemy, and that Yeshua Messiah was willing to endure hardship as a soldier of the kingdom. And he stepped forward and willingly offered himself, even to the point of death, in complete courage and faith. And in doing that, not only did he provide what was needed for us to be saved, but he gave us an example of what is required of every son and daughter of the living God in this war. That we too must be willing to endure hardship, that we too must be willing to do what it takes to win this war for the kingdom. And we have a leader we can believe in, that we can trust, our Yeshua, Messiah. Meanwhile, the war rages on toward the rest of her seed. Revelation 12:17, the dragon grew angry with the woman and went away to make war with the rest of her seed, who keep Elohim's commandments and hold Yeshua's testimony. This is the end time picture of the remnant. They continue to keep Elohim's commandments. They know to be his nation, they're required to do so. And they're required to obey his voice. But this does not mean that they don't have faith in the Messiah. Exactly the opposite thing is true. They have been saved by the blood of the Lamb. And they have a testimony. And their testimony has arisen because they're in the war, right? And they have experienced that warfare because of their faith and their unswerving obedience. And so they have a testimony of walking with Yeshua Messiah. And they also are the seed. This means that if you're one of them, the war has found you. And if that's true, then it's really time to decide to be a kingdom soldier. You've got something at stake. You have a reason to fight back. One more thing about that. Here in Romans 16:20, it says, the Elohim of peace will quickly crush Satan under your feet. You know, oftentimes in the Christian world, when they talk about the prophecy of Genesis 3:15 and so on, they rightly point to Messiah as being the seed. But do you notice in the New Covenant scriptures, it is including the remnant who are following Messiah as also part of that seed. And they're encouraged that they too will crush Satan under their feet. And you're reading about that in the book of Revelation. And of course, what this means is that while this has been a long and hard-fought battle, we will win. We absolutely will win. Some of us personally might not win. Some of us might go over to the other side. That happens in warfare. But we get to choose that, whether we're going to do that or not. But the seed of the woman will win. Well, to some people, all of this sounds pretty intense. Other people say spiritual warfare is very easy. Just take authority over those demons. Is it really that easy? You know, we have this picture here of somebody who might be a lackadaisical kind of believer, saying, the devil can't do nothing to me. I'm covered by the blood of the Lamb. And what are you doing for him? I guess that would be my question. here's the thing about folks like this. You know, we care about them and we want them to wake up. Because if they have this attitude, sooner or later what's going to happen is they're going to find that attitude will not cut it. And it's going to hurt on the day that happens. Here's some examples of what I'm talking about. Here are some very famous preachers: Finis Dake, Oral Roberts, Kenneth Hagin, Catherine Coleman, Amy Semple McPherson. They all have something in common. They all went around telling everybody that all believers should be completely healed of every disease, never should be sick. And put a lot of guilt on people too, because they got sick. And yet every one of them all died with diseased bodies. Now, I'm not saying God can't heal you, but I'm saying don't oversimplify the truth. Because if you do and you get overconfident, you can very easily be proven a liar. And that's what happened to these people. So we're looking at a war here, and wars are not easy, and there's casualties in war. So, by all means, take your enemy seriously. The scripture says, be sober and self-controlled, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, walks around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. He is actively looking to devour believers. And believers are told in the scripture to be sober, to be self-controlled, to be watchful of this. So the attitude of the devil who is not a scriptural attitude. It definitely is not a winning attitude. The winning attitude is know your enemy, even respect your enemy for who they are, and deal with them in a real way. So this is what we're encouraging. Now, besides the devil himself as an enemy, we must remember the devil has lots of help. And Yeshua said, you will be hated by all men for my name's sake. Remember, the whole world went over to the devil's side. So he's got lots of help. And in this particular presentation, we're not going into the spiritual side of this very much. You know, the side of deliverance from demonic spirits and so on. In this discussion, we are really concerned with this part of the spiritual battle, of how he uses people to attack us. You know, you do have authority over the spirits. You can cast out demons all day long. You can't cast out people very well. And they can do things to you that demonic spirits aren't able to do. So this is really the part of the spiritual battle that we're looking at right now. We have to realize about this that hatred is ratcheting up towards believers. And this is foretold for this time period, and we are seeing it. Yeshua said, you will be hated by all men for my name's sake. And this is increasing. You know, in 2015, we put out this DVD. And in this DVD, it reveals that the fifth seal of Revelation has been opened. And what that means is unprecedented persecution would soon be coming on believers around the globe. Now, when we put that out, some people said, surely you're overstating the case, that this can't really be the fifth seal being opened. But then by 2018, we had this headline. Christian persecution and genocide is worse now than any time in history, the report says. And if you're awake, you know this is true. Because we have reports about this, and all around the globe, this is true. And persecution is heating up, and here we're talking about what you might refer to as hot persecution, involving death, prison, things like this. It's heating up. In the Middle East, you all know what happened, that there were literally hundreds of thousands of believing communities in the Middle East that had been there since the 2nd or 3rd century. Now imagine, that's through the Crusades, okay? That's through hundreds of years of Muslim domination. And yet, in these last few years, these believers have been driven out of the area. And there's only a few left, and many have been killed. Many have been put into servitude because there's slavery over there. And this is not the end of that. It's really just beginning. Now, talking about the seals, I'm going to talk about that more later in the month with the presentation, the Revelation War. But our point about this right now is that the war is on, that it is heating up, that it is fulfilling Bible prophecy, and the war is everywhere. And this means it's only going to get more intense. That's the fact. And this requires something of us. This means that we need to start preparing ourselves now for the persecution that in many cases is already here in some forms, but which is going to be intensifying. So a verse like this, you therefore must endure hardship as a good soldier of Messiah Yeshua, is really an excellent verse to help us to get the mindset that we need in order to deal effectively with this war. And so nobody wants to hear about hardship, especially in a rich country like America, but we need to be thinking about it if we're going to be good soldiers of the kingdom. We must adopt the wartime mindset of a soldier. We're not like soldiers, we are soldiers. Do you know the difference? I wanted to know what persecuted believers would tell us that would help us to adapt our mindset to this growing persecution around the world that we can see coming in our direction. So I turned to opendoorsusa.org. Now they're a Christian organization that has been helping persecuted believers for a very long time and has dealt with a lot of them, and so has pulled together a lot of information from people that have faced intense warfare under persecution. For almost 60 years, Open Doors has worked in the world's most oppressive countries, empowering believers who are persecuted for their beliefs. Now that involves things like smuggling Bibles into the country and other needed things, and doing things that cannot be reported and will not be reported on behalf of the persecuted believers. And one thing in these countries, most of these countries where the persecution is, people have been putting up with it for quite a long time. So the persecution itself prepares people. And generally when persecution comes, right away, you have a big wave of believers that just leave. Either they stop being believers and assimilate into the culture, or they just go somewhere else. And then you have what I would call the real believers. They're the ones that are the soldiers. And they're willing to do what soldiers must do, which is to put themselves on the line and even their lives on the line for the kingdom. They're serious. And these believers stand strong despite the many obstacles that they face. So we're interested in their experiences and what they have to share and what we can learn from their experiences. One thing that they all want people to know that have not experienced this kind of intense persecution is that persecution brings blessings. Now, that's not the first thing you would think when you think about persecution, right? Because we don't want persecution. But persecution brings blessings. And just a reminder of these words of Messiah, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me, Yeshua said. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way that persecuted the prophets who are before you. Now, if you want to look crazy, do this. Be joyful and glad because you're being persecuted. But this is a mark of the soldiers of Yeshua Messiah. They put Paul in prison, and he started singing praises. There's a certain thing that happens when people are persecuted. There is a joy that they experience that is unlike any other kind of joy. And they do rejoice and are glad. I'm not saying that we should covet persecution, but I am saying that there is a blessing in it. And if it comes our way, it's best to see it as a blessing rather than as some kind of a curse. This is what happens with a lot of believers when they encounter persecution. The enemy wants to tell them, you've been bad. You're not a good believer. You're not a faithful believer. And that's why God has brought this bad thing into your life. A lot of people fall for that, especially the ones that have heard all these messages about how you should all have a Cadillac and $1 million house. Persecution doesn't really go along with that very well. So it can really shake people. And if we understand that persecution can actually bring spiritual blessings, having that mindset could really help us if we encounter persecution. So I really liked that as something that they brought forward. Now here's more. It says, there is something about hardship that helps us to know God deeply. When times get really tough, we discover more about who God is and how he works. Believers who have endured persecution for their faith know this well. And it's true, they'll all tell you this. The lives of persecuted believers reveal that even when things look out of control, believers can rest secure knowing that God is still in control. He is able to give courage, peace, and even joy to stand strong through the storm. Something amazing happens to people who are being persecuted. We can never discount the power of the Holy Spirit. Some of us, if we've never faced persecution, inside we might be kind of scared that, I just don't know if I could do that. I don't know if I could handle that. And those thoughts are understandable. But think about some of the people, for instance, in the scriptures who endured persecution. For instance, Stephen. What happened with him in the scriptures when they were stoning him to death. He had a vision of heaven, right? And he was really in fellowship with Messiah. So whatever they did to his body, that wasn't what was going on for him. And we'll see him one day. And this is just one example of what has happened with so many who have actually given their lives through persecution. But it doesn't have to be to the point of death. You know, recently we read the words of Messiah saying that when they bring you before the courts, don't worry about what you're going to say, because the Spirit will give you words that cannot be overcome. And so it's not something we really have to be anxious about in that sense, but we do have to have a prepared mentality in order to deal with these things. That's what we're talking about. Here's another thing that they point out as being very important, and that is weakness is a direct path to empowerment. It's really not hard to be weak when you're being persecuted. You know, they seem to have all the power, right? If they want to, they can throw you in prison, they can kill you in these forms of severe persecution. So it can make you feel weak. And of course, they want to make you feel weak, to make you capitulate. But the truth is, when we reach the end of our own strength, that's when the power of God is released. And isn't that what we really need to see happen in this world? Is his power released? The Apostle Paul, who we all know experienced a great deal of persecution, said this: "That is why, for Messiah's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong." And I find this so interesting that he uses this word delight. Would you ever expect to have the word delight in the same sentence with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and difficulties? Kind of an interesting thing, isn't it? But through going through those things, he came to that mindset of actually delighting in his own weakness, because it enabled him to see the power of God. There was one Egyptian believer who reflected on the way he was treated when he converted to Messiah. And he was speaking to people who hadn't really experienced the kind of persecution that he had. He says, "In great suffering, you discover a different Messiah than you do in normal life. Pain and suffering bring up to the surface all the weak points of your personality. In my weakest state, I had an incredible realization that Messiah loved me even right then. And he is close to those who are being afflicted, those who are in pain. He's close to them. And he gives them spiritual blessings that really far exceed the things that they're experiencing. Going on, many of these persecuted believers say that overcoming is greater than deliverance. In Romans 12:21 is a verse that comes up. "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." And here's the summary. Suffering is difficult, and the natural response is to ask God to remove it from our lives. But these trials often come with the opportunity to both grow our faith and bring glory to Messiah. Persecuted believers often ask for prayer that they would stand strong in the midst of persecution, and not just for the persecution, to be taken away. And, you know, that's the mindset of a soldier. The soldier wants to be true to his oath. That's more important to him than even his life. This is why he goes out and takes a stand in the battle lines. He could be killed. But he's fighting for a cause he believes in, and he's willing to put everything on the line. And being loyal to his oath is more important to him than even his life. That's an amazing mindset. And if we would do that for something less than the kingdom, how much more so would we have that mindset regarding the kingdom? This is another thing that the persecuted believers point out. Prayer is the ultimate fellowship. And we're reminded of Hebrews 13:3. Remember those in prison as if you were their fellow prisoners, and those who are mistreated as if you yourselves were suffering. You know, when we have the mentality of, well, that's over there, over here, this doesn't apply to us, we miss out on a great blessing. Because when we remember those who are in prison, when we remember those who are being persecuted in prayer, we ourselves are entering into fellowship with them, and they are blessed, and we are blessed too. In our ministry, we have a number of prisoners that we write to, and, you know, we continue to do that. We continue to pray for the persecuted, and we need to keep doing that. Many persecuted believers often feel isolated and alone since they're unable to fellowship with other believers. However, prayers from believers half a world away have brought the encouragement that fellowship would have for these persecuted believers. Prayer is vital not only as a direct line to God for the persecuted believer, but as a way to encourage our persecuted brothers and sisters around the world. And prayer has this amazing ability that you can be locked in a prison cell and totally out of communication by any natural means, and yet the prayer of earnest believers is something that can be literally felt to buoy you up, lift you up, and encourage you. It's so vital. Here's one last thing from these persecuted believers that I'm going to share tonight. Build yourself a cell. And this is from one Chinese pastor who spent 23 years in prison. So he's very qualified to talk about this. He said this to some other believers that hadn't faced any persecution. He said, I was pushed into a cell, but you have to push yourself into one. You have no time to get to know God. You need to build yourself a cell so you can do for yourself what persecution did for me. Simplify your life and know God. A remnant cell is a small group of remnant believers in vital community together who have the common goal of serving Messiah. And having a group of believers together like that can do things for a person in their spiritual walk that you really can't get any other way. And going to a church or Messianic synagogue once a week for an hour is just not the same thing as being in vital community together. That's what a cell is. And you know, if you think about the word cell, cell is the smallest unit of the human body, right? That's really what the body of Messiah is about, is all these cells all around the entire world being linked together in his body. And I think this is a good point to keep in mind. Don't wait until persecution pushes you into a cell of believers. Do it yourself. Do it now. and then you'll be ready. And here at Tsiyon, we want to help you do that. So if anyone out there, let's say you're alone in your own area, and you don't have this fellowship, and you're willing to do what you can to build yourself a cell, by all means contact us, and we will do everything we can do to help you to accomplish that, so that you will have other like-minded believers around you. And it makes such a huge difference in your life. We here basically have a cell, and we're together in community, and it makes so much difference in our lives. Here's more. Don't wait for persecution to adopt the wartime mindset of a soldier. Now, there's some things you can do right away. Like, let's say you live here in the West, you still have relative freedom. You can think about things like this. If it's on the internet, it isn't private. You know, when we have so much freedom, a lot of times we don't even think of the fact that we're making all this information available to the enemy, so that when the enemy actually gets ready to strike, you know, they have all this information about you, along with pictures, and not just you, about everybody you know. And why help them? So think about that. And here's a little illustration I found. Some low-tech tips to protect your privacy online. You know, stop this and look at this when you watch this video, when this is recorded. And think about these things. There are many, many other suggestions you can find on the internet about privacy and even being anonymous. And this is something we need to educate ourselves about. Don't just think because everything seems so free right now that it's going to go on this way. And you know, all this stuff, it gets saved forever, right? You know, for example, Google has published that they save all searches for 30 years. Well, just think of the case that you could build against somebody just by selective searches that they did. Just think of a list. On this date, you looked up this. On this date, you looked up this. Things that were perfectly innocent and that you had a reason to do can be built together to look like you're some kind of a terrorist or a criminal. So, using a search engine that doesn't track you might be a solution to that, at least for things that could be considered in any way questionable by the authorities. And in saying that, I'm not talking about things that are like building bombs or something. If you just look up certain websites, you can be discriminated against because of that. You know, let's say, for instance, if you look up something about a Donald Trump rally or something, that now puts you in that camp. And if the other camp ever gets a hold of all of that data, you could actually end up being discriminated against in a whole bunch of different ways. This is happening to a lot of people, by the way, this kind of thing, especially to those who are considered conservative. And just today, I talked to one of us who was trying to send out Twitter messages with our website address in them. And they used to be able to do that. Now our website address is being removed from the Twitter messages. So this is becoming more of an issue as we go along, and the system is using this more. We need to be awake to this and take reasonable steps not to be targeted. We have another person who we heard from recently, a partner who really is no different than you or I, who has been put on the terrorist watch list. This kind of stuff is happening behind the scenes, you know, and it hasn't come to the point yet where they're rounding up people to put them in prison. But there right now are consequences that can come to you. For instance, if our URL, our web address, can't be sent in a Twitter message, that means everybody that would want to use that medium to tell others, they're prevented from doing it. We're finding that we're having suppression in YouTube. We're finding suppression in other social sites. It isn't just us. It's a lot of different groups. And some of the major websites that are considered conservative, if you go to their website, they'll tell you they are losing traffic because this is happening. And basically what's happening is that the leftist agenda is wanting their message to go out. At the same time, they're suppressing everything that they consider to be conservative. So if people are just overwhelmed with one point of view, while the other point of view is being suppressed, then they feel they can win doing that. I think they can win doing that too, by the way, at least on that level of dominating the so-called conversation. But it's not a conversation if it's just one side, is it? So these are things that we need to think about, and this is a sort of persecution already. This is a denial of your rights. Here's another thing you've got to know. Being too trusting can hurt you or even kill you. You are all such nice people. That could kill you. We all want to be nice to people. We might be the last people in the world, believers, that want to be nice to people. And I'm not saying don't be a nice person, but also I'm saying don't be a dumb person. Be careful about what you say and to whom you say it. You know, discretion is a biblical virtue. And yet we have a culture today that's telling you, be transparent. Tell people everything. This is not biblical. The scriptures tell us use discretion in what you say. We have the example of Yeshua Messiah. Did he tell everybody everything? We have places in the Gospels where people said to him, you're the Messiah, and he says to them, don't tell anybody. Discretion is really essential, and we need to start praying and asking to get that gift of discretion in our speech. Here's a big reason why I'm talking about this. Betrayal will become the greatest threat to your life. I'm not saying it might. I'm telling you absolutely, it's going to. It is going to get there. Matthew 24 is talking about this very time period that we're coming up on. And he said, then they will deliver you up to oppression and will kill you. You will be hated by all of the nations for my name's sake. Then many will stumble and will deliver up one another and will hate one another. That's talking about believers or professed believers. They're going to stumble and they're going to betray one another. There's nothing you can do to stop that from happening. But you do need to learn to use discretion. You might save your life and somebody else's. Even more so, look at Luke 21. You will be handed over even by parents, brothers, relatives, and friends. They will cause some of you to be put to death. You will be hated by all men for my name's sake. Now, if in reading that, you're thinking, oh, well, my parents, brothers, relatives, or friends are better than that and they would never do that, then you're missing the point of the whole thing. You're missing the reason why Yeshua even said it. You have no idea the evil that lies in the heart of your friends. You don't know which ones, though. So this is why it is so vital for us to learn discretion. You must always weigh everything you say to unbelievers and even to believers who love the world, including family and friends. You can tell who loves the world. Oh, but you shouldn't judge people. I'm not talking about judging people, okay? You're not going to decide their eternal destiny, but you have to decide who they are in relation to you. That's your obligation. It's not just something you can do, it's something you must do. So you need to decide, are they people you can trust? And to what level can you trust them? And this is true of unbelievers, but it's also true of believers who do not give evidence in their life of totally giving themselves over to Messiah. Because people who are divided are dangerous people in terms of what we're talking about. Those are the people that can easily be turned by the enemy. The people you can trust are the people who are totally given to Messiah above everything. And you can even be fooled about that. The Word is our standard. The scriptures talk about this in the book of Psalms. How interesting this is, that this is the very first verse of the Psalms, the very first two verses of the very first chapter. So I think that's pretty important, being right at the beginning of the Psalms. It says, "Blessed is the man who doesn't walk in the counsel of the wicked, nor stand in the way of sinners, nor sit in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in Yahweh's Torah. On his Torah he meditates day and night." So you see, if you hang out with wicked people, which wicked people are people that do not keep the commandments, people who are choosing to be sinners. We know in one sense we're all sinners, right? Because we're born in sin. That's not what this is talking about. This is people who choose to be sinners. And we're living in a time where people do that. And not only that, they call their sin good. Talking about people like that. Or sit in the seat of scoffers. If you sit with people and talk with people and accept them scoffing at God and at His Word, you're sitting in the wrong place and you need to get up and get out. Now, some people might hear this and say, yes, but what about witnessing to people? Witnessing to people is not being friends with the world. It's an entirely different thing. You're not bringing them in to your inner world and revealing all your secrets and everything about your life to people you're witnessing to who are unbelievers. You have an object in mind, and that is to share Messiah with them. And this is not judging them, because if you are continuing to share Him with them, then are you not offering them the opportunity to know Him? You're not saying, well, you could never be a believer, but you are a blessed person if you make these distinctions. You know, we are so brainwashed in our modern culture. When you come up with the word discrimination, that immediately registers in your brain as something that's bad that you shouldn't do. The scriptures tell us we need to discriminate, but not on the basis of things like skin color or stupid stuff like that. We need to discriminate on the basis of the scriptures. That's what the psalm here is telling us about. We must do this. And especially as we come into times of persecution where we know we've already been warned here as to what's going to happen. Should we not use some wisdom in our associations with people? So that's really a word to the wise. The scriptures give us direction in many places to make these kinds of decisions. And as we look into a person's life who has some doorway into our sphere, sometimes we wonder, is this person of the devil or are they of God? You know, sometimes you see some stuff on one side that screams devil, devil, devil. But on the other side, you see things that, oh, well, they're trying to be nice. Maybe they're open, and we want to help them. So how do we decide what we're going to do with this person? Well, 1 John says this, in this the children of God are revealed, and the children of the devil. Whoever doesn't do righteousness is not of God. Neither is he who doesn't love his brother. And I believe that these are indications that are given to us to help us to discern who we're talking to and what level of trust we can put in given individuals. And let me tell you something, all of these people who've been through persecution, they have discretion. A lot of them have it because they have been burned. They have been burned by their fellow church members. They have been burned by their family. They have been burned by their boss at work. They've been burned by their friends. Because when it gets right down to it, siding with the world is what the world is always going to do. And if you have to be sacrificed on the altar for them to make it plain that they're on board with whatever authority we're talking about, they will do that. And then, you will be sacrificed up to that because you didn't exercise discretion in many cases. So some of these people have stories as to how they ended up in prison for 23 years. And they almost all include betrayal. So this is what we need to do and start doing it. This is part of our mindset makeover that we need, is discipline yourself to allow the Word and the Spirit to control your every word. We can't afford anymore to just be running off at the mouth because we like to talk. We need to be measuring our words. Yeshua said that every word will be judged. So, speaking at all is a pretty risky thing to be doing, if you think about that. So think about your words. Think about what you say and why you're saying it, that your words might be upbuilding to those people that need that encouragement, people that need the truth. Don't ever run down your brothers and sisters to other people. There might be something about one of your brothers and sisters you don't like. Do not vent to other brothers and sisters. That's just evil and wrong. You can do tremendous harm, and particularly in times of persecution, which are coming up, where you have to depend on every person, because people all know each other in any kind of a community of believers. If you start making enemies with other believers, that is going to come back on you in a really bad way. So don't do that. Just a word to the wise about that. When the Civil War broke out, the boys on both sides thought, oh, well, we'll go do this over a weekend and this war will be over. You know, the southern boys, they thought, well, those northern boys, they'll never be able to withstand us, and so we'll just go do this and that'll be over. The northern boys thought the same thing. When they actually got in the clenches of warfare, it was a long, terrible, drawn-out ordeal. And an entire culture was basically wiped out. And war, any kind of war, whether we're talking about spiritual war or physical war, war is horrible. So you have to realize that warfare of any kind is going to test you beyond what you are comfortable with, beyond even what you think you can tolerate, many times dragging on beyond what you'd ever think. And so we need to know this, and we need to consider what our focus is in our life. If your focus is on your own wealth and comfort and safety, you will not endure what is being brought upon the entire inhabited earth. You won't endure. I'm sorry, but your desires are for the wrong things. And you really need a change of mind if this is where you're at. Now, this is where a lot of people are at, and a lot of those people would never hear a message like this because they don't listen to anything longer than 15 minutes. Don't be a shallow person like that. Life is more important than that. You need to take some time to build up your character if you're going to be a good soldier of Messiah Yeshua. It's something you have to work at. It doesn't just happen. And you have to have the right focus in your life as to what's important to you, what your priorities are. To be a good soldier of Messiah, Messiah has to be what's important to you. Am I right? Find the army that is actually fighting the war and join in battle formation. I will tell you, in a war, if you are a straggler out there in the battlefield and you're not with your unit, you will not last. The bullets are flying everywhere. You're going to be the first casualty. Don't let that happen to yourself. Messiah is assembling his spiritual army here in these last days. You need to find a unit that's serious about fighting this war and get in the middle of it. That's what will be a place of protection for you. I like this picture. I like the fact that every one of these soldiers is part of a wall of protection. Wouldn't you feel like relatively pretty safe back there? Well, protection from the enemy is good. Strategically, there are times when that's what's needed, but it's really only the beginning. Spiritual warfare is not just about keeping safe. You know, that's how a lot of people deal with spiritual warfare. It's all about just keeping safe, making it go away. That's not spiritual warfare. You know, that's like capitulating to the enemy, is what that is. It's not warfare. Warfare is what overcomers do. Overcomers know that to win, you have to take the battle to the enemy. You cannot win just by letting the enemy pummel you. You got to take the battle back to the enemy to win the war. This is what we need to do. Now, I'm not talking about actually hurting people. So don't get me wrong about this. You know, we're not going out with bullets and knives and hurting people because we don't want to hurt people. But we are talking about fighting this war of words, this war of concepts, and a war for the souls of men and women. And we're not going to surrender those people. I'm not willing to surrender one person who's part of the remnant if I can do anything to stop that from happening. But I know we will lose some people. What we'll find out in the end is not everybody that wants to be part of the remnant or thinks they're part of the remnant really is part of the remnant. We will find that out, but I'm not willing to concede that person. They're going to have to actually do it, if you follow what I'm saying. We have to have a winning mentality and not just give up. 2 Corinthians 10, 3 through 5. For though we walk in the flesh, we don't wage warfare according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but mighty before Elohim to the throwing down of strongholds, throwing down imaginations, and every high thing that is exalted against the knowledge of Elohim, and bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Messiah. Now let me tell you this. This world is filled with deception. I don't believe something just because some scientist said it, and you shouldn't either. I don't believe something just because some stuffed suit on the TV says it to me, and you shouldn't either. Our job as soldiers is to not believe the world and instead believe his word and bring the truth of his word to bear against all those lies, against all that deception, that the truth might ring clear in the ears of every lover of truth so that they can choose their side in the war. That's what we need to do. Bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Messiah. Now you might think, I'm not a person who's very good at communicating. Doesn't matter. Can you be a vessel that the Holy Spirit can use? You know what? 99% of being a soldier for Messiah is showing up. Can you show up? Can you stand up and open your mouth and let the Spirit of God flow through with truth that cannot be refuted? Very little actually depends on your skills and abilities, if that's what makes you hold back. You got to stop that. It all depends on him, and the only real requirement it takes to be powerful in warfare is to step forward and be there, and to let him work through you. All these other things we're talking about are really for you. You know, to help you to have the mindset where on that day you actually can step up and let him use you. That's what we have to get over, right? Is mindset problems. A lot of it having been instilled by the world, a lot of it part of our flesh nature, a lot of it part of deceptions that have come from a whole host of different places. And we have to break through that and let his word inform us and actually be changed by his word. Our priorities changed, our goals in life changed, everything about us changed into the mindset of a soldier. I like this little picture. Boy, I felt like that. Have you? Those slings and arrows. And it never seems to be just one, does it? They always come in clouds. It's understandable that when this is happening, it makes people feel like hunkering down and trying to basically get some cover. But the overcomers don't just take the slings and arrows of the enemy. They don't just run and hide in a corner. They might as a strategic move for a point, but they don't stay there. To win, it requires holy order, active training, and great personal commitment. Every soldier must have strong focus and be serious about training, practice. You know, a lot of believers have a thought in mind that because we have a God who is so great, who can win every battle, that we don't really need to be very concerned about our part in that. That we don't really need to train. That we don't really need to have that level of personal commitment. The remnant know that's not what the scriptures tell us. They tell us that being a soldier for Messiah Yeshua is something very rigorous. And it requires commitment and focus and training and practice in the things that disciples of Messiah do. However, when we do invest our effort and our time into that, we can find that we can be very effective in countering the enemy. We can really give it back to the enemy. Learn to shoot straight and fly right. You know what I would like to have happen? I would like to see every time the devil attacks Yahweh's people, for him to get hurt worse than they did. That's what I would like to see happen. For him to try to take something from the kingdom and instead to have a whole big chunk of his dominion ripped out of his hand. I think that's how we need to think about spiritual warfare. It's not just us not getting beat up. Let's think in terms of defeating the enemy in the areas in which he attacks us. That's really why we need to have this sense of focus, why we need to hone our skills, why we need to actually practice those things so that we can readily give it back to the enemy and we will know what to do. You know, my newsletter that I sent out today, it's about soldiers who have been in combat with their lives on the line and what they had to say about it. One thing most all of them said is, when I was in that position, I relied on my training. And they just did what they learned to do. And that's how not only they survived, but they won. I think that applies to being a soldier of Messiah too. That we can be more effective by good training from the scriptures. Now, we're doing a lot about that. James 4:7, by the way, I think is a verse that goes to this: resist the devil and he will flee from you. There's nothing like well-targeted arrows of truth to send the enemy running. I found that is true. I think we should think about Zion this way right now. Zion boot camp. It's not really a comfy place, is it? We could put in some better chairs or something. But I don't think that would help. Because we look at these things that are realities in Scripture that a lot of people don't really want to talk about or think about. The reason is we really want to be soldiers here. That's who we are. That's who the remnant is. That's who Israel is. We know that because we've taken time to know Israel. We know our father, Jacob. We know what a fighter he was. We know that he was all the things we just have been reading about and talking about. You can learn so much from our patriarchs when it comes to warfare because there are no better fighters than them. And that's all available to you. And you know what? Most all of it gets totally missed. They have no idea. People have no idea what is there. We do. We know. We do know. And all you have to do is commit yourself to spending some time taking in what we've got about our forefathers, and you too will be changed by them. So much is in his word. Can you fill these shoes? Well, you could look at those as the shoes of your forefathers. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Can you fill those shoes? You're challenged to fill those shoes in the pages of the Scriptures. People think of men like that as, well, those are Bible figures. I could never be that person. If you think that, then you totally have missed what this is all about. We're being called to be Israel. Every one of us needs to be a Jacob. Every one of us needs to be fighting the fight that he fought to establish the kingdom. That is the calling of Israel in this world in 2019. Here's what you can do. Some direct steps that we're labeling Zion Boot Camp. Listen to the Torah Midrash and complete the quiz every week. Make a commitment and keep it. I can guarantee you, if you were a soldier in the military and you had made a commitment that you were going to be there to yourself and you didn't show up, there would be consequences for that. You have to discipline yourself to do what's needed. If you do this, I'm telling you, it will change your life. It will mold you into a soldier for Messiah. But it takes you doing it. It takes you deciding to do it. That's what boot camp is about, is building your personal character to be able to follow through. And if you follow through on this, you're going to meet your forefathers. You're going to be there at Mount Sinai when Yahweh came down upon the mountain and spoke to Moses and to Israel. You're going to see what the commandments are really about and how they apply in our lives. You're going to know the name of the living God and a whole lot more. But you won't get any of that unless you commit yourself to be there and show up. So that's the first thing for Zion Boot Camp. The other thing is to view this Zion meeting and keep up every week. We have up-to-date information for you. Food at the right time to build you up spiritually, in tune with what is actually happening in the world and in your life. And everybody that does that knows what I'm saying is true. It's a supernatural thing that's going on. But you won't get that unless you show up. That's what boot camp is about. Here's what's going to be the hardest thing for a lot of people. Enroll in Tsiyon Academy and fulfill your assignments. We have some wonderful students in Tsiyon Academy, but we also have other people who feel reluctant to put themselves out there. And, you know, that's normal, and that might have been okay in the past, but when we're facing what's coming, we need to train. This gives you an opportunity to train. Why would you pass that up? And yes, it does require something of you to put yourself out there, to take on the challenge. Overcomers take on the challenge. They don't just go hide. So, you know, if you have been with Tsiyon and you've enjoyed the rest of what we've had, but you've held back from that commitment, take the Tsiyon Boot Camp Challenge. A step forward and start moving forward with what we're doing in Tsiyon Academy. I like this picture because I think it really portrays so much what war is about. So this is why I'm showing this. And you know what? On a spiritual level, this is so much what the war has been like through the many centuries. It has just seemed like it was never going to stop, you know? Sometimes it still feels this way. But yet you have the stalwart soldiers that are still holding the line. What is ahead is going to become a lot more intense. And it's not going to be a walk in the park. So what we're recommending is do all you can to prepare yourself now. Prepare, endure, and fight to win this battle. Our theme, you therefore must endure hardship as a good soldier of Messiah Yeshua. That's a mindset. We need to all start working on that mindset so that we're ready when we need to be. Spiritual warfare. Fight to win.
Was this video informative? Click the like button below to help spread the word to others. Feel free to leave a comment and share your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you won't miss out on more amazing content from Eliyahu Ben David.
For whatever things were written before were written for our learning, that we, through the patience and comfort of the Scriptures, might have hope. You know, the apostles, they were Torah scholars. This is why I'm doing Tsiyon Academy. The lessons include 2-hour audio programs and quiz modules. All the lessons in the Torah can be applied to us today. Not to mention, they open up the renewed covenant scriptures in a whole new level, much like the apostles had understanding of the Torah. Plus, I can do the courses in my own time, at my own pace, with no prerequisites, and at a very low cost. I can do them here. Or here.
Tsiyon Academy students are provided with study materials, the Tsiyon Messianic Scriptures, in-depth verse-by-verse programs, and quizzes with your final grade and a certificate at the end of the course. Tsiyon Academy also offers assignments for students who would like to opt in to take part in Tsiyon Tabernacle live Sabbath meetings. Become immersed in the Torah. Sign up at Tsiyon.net today for your free trial.